Lift up your heads, for your redemption draweth nigh. Robert Tuchman. I don't remember the publication date. But in chapter 1, in the first paragraph of the book, she tells us this about 1910. So gorgeous was the spectacle in the May morning of 1910, when 9 kings rode in the funeral of Edward VII of England, that the crowd, waiting and hushed in black cloud awe, could not keep back gasps of admiration. In scarlet and blue and green and purple, 3 by 3, the sovereigns rode through the palace gates, with plumed helmets, gold braid, crimson sashes, and jeweled orders flashing in the sun. After them came 5 heirs apparent, 40 more imperial or royal highnesses, 7 queen, 4 dowager, and 3 regnant, a scattering of special ambassadors from uncrowned countries. Together they represented 70 nations in the greatest assemblage of royalty and rank ever gathered in one place, and of its kind, the last. The muffled tongue of Big Ben toiled 9 by the clock as the cortege left the palace, but on history's clock it was sunset, and the sun of the old world was setting in a dying blaze of splendor, never to be seen again. Now you can see we're obviously working up to 1914, the time of the Gentiles coming to an end. But the Gentile kings, and this beautiful paragraph here from 1910, shows the immense power that the kings of Christendom had prior to 1914. 70 nations, 9 kings, all of these things. But you know, the times of the Gentiles run out, and the kings have had their day. On the morning of October 2nd, 1914, Brother Russell entered the Bethel dining room and announced to the Bethel family, "The Gentile times are ended. The kings have had their day." Daniel 2:44, "And in the days of those kings shall the God of heaven set up a kingdom which shall never be destroyed, nor shall the sovereignty thereof be left to another people. But it shall break in pieces and consume all these kingdoms, and it shall stand forever." This is the prophecy that says those beautiful and magnificent, majestic kings of Christendom that had reigned for centuries, we're going to see some of them go back 700 years. The time for that was at an end. Let me jump to another scripture real quick, because we're going to relate this back to the history of what happened after 1914. 1 Kings 19, 11 and 12. This is God speaking to Elijah. "And he said, Go forth and stand upon the mount before Jehovah. And behold, Jehovah passed by. And a great and strong wind rent the mountains and brake in pieces the rocks before Jehovah. But Jehovah was not in the wind. After the wind, an earthquake. And after the earthquake, a fire. But Jehovah was not in the fire. And after the fire, a still small voice." Now you recognize this from our prophetic studies. Some of the symbols used here, very familiar to us all. Wind equals war. By the way, there was a best-selling novel called The Winds of War, so people in the world get the connection between the two. Earthquake, revolution. Fire, anarchy. And so this is the general outline of how things would proceed during the time of Jesus' presence. There would be war, followed by earthquake, followed by revolution, followed by anarchy. Well, let's move forward here to 1918. The armistice was signed, end of the war, November 11th, and things changed by that time and shortly thereafter. Thrones lost during World War I. Remember all of those monarchs that we saw earlier, all that royalty? Let's look what it was like from 1910, just 9 years later. Now bear with me, I'm going to give you some dry history here, but I want you to get, and the list I'm going to give you here is only a partial list. It could be much larger. Principality of Albania. William of Wied, sovereign prince of Albania. He left the country September 3rd, 1914. He was an early one that fell. Kingdom of Prussia. This is Germany. I didn't put down the name here, but this guy left November 9th, 1918. He abdicated. Oh, there it is. Wilhelm II, 1918. Gone. Kingdom of Bavaria. November 13th, 1918. King Ludwig III. Kingdom of Saxony. After World War I, again, here's another person. This is King Friedrich Augustus III. On November 13th, he left the throne. And again, that's 1918. Kingdom of Württemberg. November 30th, 1980. King Wilhelm II's reign came to an end. Kingdom of Montenegro. Nikola I, King of Montenegro. November 22nd, 1918. They merged it and became what later was called Yugoslavia. He was out. Kingdom of Russia. Emperor or Tsar Nicholas II. On March 15th, 1917, he was thrown out of office. And he and his children, the whole family were killed on July 17th, 1918. The Duchy of Baden, Frederick II, Grand Duke of Baden, out, November 22nd, 1918. The Duchy of Hesse, Ernst Ludwig, refused to abdicate but lost his throne in November 9th, 1918. Duchy of Mecklenburg-Schwerin, November 14th, 1918. Frederick Franz IV, out. Duchy of Mecklenburg-Strelitz. This is Grand Duke Adolf Frederick VI, February 23rd, 1918. Now, bear with me, I'm making a point here. Duchy of Oldenburg, Frederick Augustus II, out, November 11th, 1918. Kingdom of Bulgaria. Now, this one I want to read a little bit more because this is after 1918 now. Are you getting the point here? The kings have had their day. These are all the kings that were wiped out after 1914, after World War I. A little bit longer after there, the Kingdom of Bulgaria. The August 23rd, or August 28th, 1943, Tsar Boris III died and appointed his 6-year-old son, who is pictured here, Isar Simeon II. But the Bulgarian government was overthrown by the communists in 1946. So now we're post-1918. But it continues. The Kingdom of Greece, King Constantine II. On April 21st, 1967, a coup d'etat forced the royal family to flee. He was out. Kingdom of Italy, Umberto I, the last king of Italy, took the throne in 1946, but in June 12th, he was deposed. The Ottoman Empire, this is the Turkish Empire, November 1st, 1922, Mehmed VI was expelled. Oh, I got a few more here. Kingdom of Romania. We have some Romanians among our brethren here. King Michael, 1947, 2 years after the World War II, Romania had a communist government and he was out. Kingdom of Serbia. I'm going to skip through these. I think you see the point. There's a few more here. Kingdom of Spain. Brethren, the kings have had their day. The prophecy that the times of the Gentiles were to remove these kings of Christendom. And I want to emphasize that. These are not merely kings of different ones in the world. These are kings that had a very close connection with papacy and with other Christian organizations, Christian churches. They ruled together for centuries. But by 1918, most of them were gone. 171. I should have opened with this one. Verse 3. The Gentile times have ended, for their kings have had their day. They have had their day. All right, let's backtrack a little bit. We took it all the way up to almost modern times, but let's talk about World War II. I read a little bit earlier, 1 Kings 19, and we saw the three symbols there: wind, earthquake, and fire. Following World War II, and by the way, my personal opinion is that the war phase here is over. that we are now more in the earthquake phase that really started from 1917 in Russia, a little bit of an overlap there, continues to this day with more and more nations experiencing revolutionary fervor. Even in this country, we're seeing it. Nope, I'm backed up here a little bit. Let's go to 1948. There's another lovely year, the nation of Israel born. Now, we say nation of Israel. This is a civil government. And there has not been a civil government run by Jews really since 607 BC, since Nebuchadnezzar overthrew. Now, true, there was some rebellions in the 2nd century BC, and true that in the 2nd century AD, there was a rebellion by Jews, and they briefly held some control that was eventually defeated by the Romans. But they really have not had a stable government since Nebuchadnezzar took the throne, or took the nation and destroyed the temple in 607 BC. Zechariah chapter 12, verses 2 and 3. Here's a scripture that we want to talk about. Behold, I will make Jerusalem a cup of reeling unto all the peoples round about. And upon Judah also shall it be in the siege against Jerusalem. And it shall come to pass in that day, I will make Jerusalem a burdensome stone for all the peoples. All that burden themselves with it shall be sore wounded, and all the nations of the earth shall be gathered against it. Emphasis here is Jerusalem as representing the seed of Abraham, the fleshly seed of Abraham, residing in Israel. By the way, if you look at Bible students going back in the 19th century and some even in the 18th century, many of those Bible students, again, not Bible students in a formal term, more a functionary term, but scholars, they recognized that there would be a time when God's favor would be shown to Israel and they would return to the land, and nearly all of them, I don't know an exception, understood that they would be regathered in unbelief. It won't be until they're back in the land that they would have the blindness removed. And again, we see that today. And since 1948, Israel has been a burdensome stone to the nations. What tree is used in the Bible as a symbol of Israel? The fig tree. That's right, the fig tree. We just finished a very interesting study in our New Zealand meeting, Sunday morning meeting. It's Sunday morning in New Zealand, but it's Saturday afternoon in the United States. But we looked at all the crops of Israel, and we saw some beautiful symbolic and prophetic applications to all of them. And of course, the fig tree was used as well. The fig tree has 3 crops each year, the fig tree in Israel. There's the first ripe figs. They ripen 9 to 11 weeks after the blossoms in the spring. The summer figs, that's the big crop. We'd say that's the farmer's crop. And then there's the winter figs, not much of a harvest. Most of these fall to the ground. And many years ago, when we were talking about this subject, we made an application, which I'm going to give you here in a moment, of the first ripe figs and the summer figs. And Sister Alpha Katurba asked me, well, what do the winter figs represent? Well, I didn't have anything. And it bothered me. Yeah, it seemed like the picture wasn't complete. Finally, I figured out, some months later, I figured out, at least the Lord gave me an idea, that I didn't quite have the order in history right. Now, this is the order in crops. But I'm going to change the order here. I'm going to put the winter figs at the top. And now we got something that makes a lot of sense. The winter figs here represent Israel in the 1st century. It was a crop not harvested. Remember, Jesus said, your house is abandoned to you. And the crop fell to the ground. The Romans destroyed the city of Jerusalem and killed over 1 million. It was a crop not harvested. So it represents Israel, but now in the 1st century. The first ripe figs, we would suggest, represent Zionism, particularly from 1878 onward. And the summer figs represent all nations coming into Israel in the mediatorial reign. Let me focus on on the first ripe figs here for a moment. Remember we saw earlier that from the first blossoms of the fig tree in the spring, it's 9 to 11 weeks until the first fruit appears, the first ripe figs appeared. Do you remember when Jesus was walking along in the spring and he saw a fig tree with leaves, and he went there and found no fruit on it and pronounced a curse on it? Well, you know all that what that means. Let me bring it back from a botany standpoint. The leaves of a fig tree do not come out until the first ripe figs are ready. The fruitage actually develops before the leaves. So when Jesus saw leaves, he had every right to expect there to be a fruit. And on this one, there wasn't. But that 9 to 11 weeks, one encyclopedia said about 10 weeks. And I thought about that. How many days in 10 weeks? 70 days. We use the expression a day for a year. Well, I'm going to make an application here. 70 years from the first blossomings of Zionism in 1878 brought us to the first ripe figs, the nation of Israel being established. It was 70 years. I like that connection. Did the Lord intend it? It's a nice application. Perhaps he did, perhaps he didn't. Let's go back to 1948. When Israel declared their independence, May 14th, 1948, immediately nations all around them attacked them. The Arab nations did not want an independent Israel in the midst of them. And they began what was called the War of Independence. Israel won that war, although it was a protracted war, cost a lot of Israeli lives as well as Arab lives, cost the nation economically a great deal. But eventually there was a cessation of the war activity, and they were left alone. Basically, they won the war, although at great cost. One of the great costs was that they lost Jerusalem. Jerusalem was still, at that point in time, in the possession and control of Jordan. And so you have all of these Israelis here in 1949 and onward, that they could not even go into Jerusalem. Now, that was really against the agreement. Let me read this. Following the 1948 War of Independence, Jerusalem came under Jordanian control. Jews were expelled from Jerusalem and effectively barred from visiting the Western Wall, despite Article 8 of the 1949 Armistice Agreement, which required making arrangements for Israeli Jewish access to the Western Wall. Jewish sites were not maintained, and Jewish cemeteries had been desecrated. They didn't have the holy city of Jerusalem. That was important to the Jews. Well, they had another war in 1956. It didn't change too much. And that brings us down to the War of 1967, the Six-Day War. And the Six-Day War will go down in history as one of the most, I don't want to use the word majestic. To the Jews it was a majestic victory in very short order, 6 days to win a war. How many wars in history have been won in 6 days? I can't think of any offhand. But that was certainly a significant period of time. And what did it result in? They got Jerusalem back. I like Zechariah 12, verse 6, as perhaps describing that 6-day war. In that day, I will make the chieftains of Judah like a pan of fire among wood, like a flaming torch among sheaves. Have you ever seen some dry sheaves or dry wood and you apply fire to it? It erupts very quickly in a conflagration. And they shall devour all the peoples round about, on the right hand and on the left. And they of Jerusalem shall yet again dwell in their own place, even in Jerusalem. This prophecy predicted that Israel would get Jerusalem back in a very military setting, fire among wood, devouring the peoples round about. So this was fulfilled in 1967, in their own place, even in Jerusalem. And you know, when the Israeli soldiers went in, they went in with tears as they went back to the Western Wall. Now, what's so important about the Western Wall? Right on the other side of the Western Wall is the Golden Dome of the Arabs, a very holy place for Muslims. But right down under here, there are ancient stones. And evidently, some of these stones go all the way back to Solomon's temple. That's why this was holy. I'm sure you've seen many pictures of the Jewish people and the rabbis at the wall, and I was there in 1917, and you look in the cracks and things like that, and you can see all these little notes. 2017. Yeah. My wife is shaking her head, right. So I wouldn't not know what I do without her correction day by day. But there's all these notes in the cracks here that are prayers. If you're a Jew, you can write a prayer and you put it in the crack, and you believe that it's a special place for God to hear it and respond to it. And so here you have Jerusalem now back into the hands of the Jews. Now, with all of I'm getting into current events here, Brother Harry, sorry, I won't say too much more. With all of the animosity and hatred and terroristic attacks against Israel, the people worry there in Israel about sustaining themselves, and they build up their militaries and whatnot. But there's a promise that's given, and this is Amos 9:15. And I will plant them upon their land, and they shall no more be plucked up out of the land which I have given them, saith Jehovah, their God, thy God. They will not be taken away from their land again. Now, how much more terrorism are we going to see? How many more battles are we going to see? Well, that's for current and future brethren to talk about. Let's see, I'm running low on time here. Let's go to 1984. I picked this date out of the hat because back in 1984, there were some brethren that thought that it might be significant because of this scripture, Isaiah 23, verses 15 through 17. And it shall come to pass in that day that Tyre shall be forgotten 70 years, according to the days of one king. After the end of 70 years, it shall be unto Tyre as the song of the harlot. Take a harp, go about the city, thou harlot, thou hast been forgotten, and make melody. Sing many songs, that thou mayest be remembered. And it shall come to pass that after the 70 years, that Jehovah will visit Tyre, and she shall return to her hire, and she shall play the harlot, and with all the kingdoms of the world upon the face of the earth. The brethren at that time, you may recall, it was Pope John Paul II, the Polish Pope. And he had begun a series of travels around the world. Now, remember, 1981, he was almost assassinated, the same year that President Reagan was shot. But a little bit prior to that, he had started some travel, and after that, he traveled intensely. In fact, how intensely did he travel? Well, here's something I got from Wikipedia. Papal travel outside of Rome has been historically rare, and voluntary travel of the Pope was non-existent for the first 500 years. Pope John Paul II, 1978 to 2005, undertook more pastoral trips than all his predecessors combined. Pope Francis, Pope Paul, Pope Benedict also traveled globally, the latter to a lesser extent due to his advanced age. Papal travels seem to be corresponding to the Tyre playing the harlot to all the nations of the world. By the way, if you do a study on Tyre, you'll find there's a king of Tyre and there is a prince of Tyre. King of Tyre we generally see as Satan, prince of Tyre is papacy. So this connection of Tyre with papacy is important. So I had a little dilemma at this point in putting the talk together, because I said, well, let me make a list of where the Pope John Paul II particularly had traveled, but all of them. I got 8 pages. I said, how am I going to put 8 pages in a PowerPoint? It would just be a waste of the time. If you look it up, you'll be able to see. The papal connection with the governments of this world, with the ambassadorships and always keeping contact, is very clearly marked by all these papal travels. And so 1984 may not be the exact 70 years, but certainly from that period onward, even up to today. I mean, just last week Pope Francis was in Siam, and then he was going to go other places, that the harlot is traveling around the world, enticing the nations of the earth. So we went from something that started in the 1980s to something that's continuing. Experiences of the church. Some of the experiences prophetically profiled. We won't take the time to read 2 Kings chapter 2, 1 through 14. We're just going to pick out some points here. You remember that this was the last day or the last days of Elijah before he was taken. Now, when you start looking at that, you find out that Elijah and Elisha, they start out this journey leaving Gilgal. All right, Gilgal, I think would suggest represents coming out of the Babylon in the 1870s. Gilgal, historically, was where Joshua circumcised the people after they had been wandering for 40 years. For whatever reason, they didn't practice circumcision while they were wandering. And so Joshua understood that this was a requirement under the Abrahamic covenant, the Abrahamic promise, and so he made sure that all of the nation was circumcised at that point. Gilgal means a rolling away, and it's suggestive of the rolling away of the flesh here. Now, with the start of Brother Russell's ministry, there was a new condition that the church could find fellowship in, the Bible student movement. Now, I don't want to say that, how do I want to put this? There was a Bible student movement prior to Brother Russell. We already made mention of Brother Storrs, Brother William Miller, going back. There was a lot of activity in the early part of the 19th century, and a lot of truth that was found and was understood. But with the ministry of Brother Russell, you have that all rolled together, as well as an organization that would attract people. And so you had to come out of Babylon. In fact, that's part of what we read in Revelation 18. Come out of her, my people. Well, you're going to come out of there. Where are you going to go? Well, the answer is the truth movement. Now, this is not egotistical. It's not sectarian, when we talk about our movement, because our movement is non-denominational. We do not have a head. We do not have a credo. We don't have a requirement for membership. We recognize that membership is with Christ in heaven. But for my part, if all of a sudden I didn't like you and I said, I'm going to worship Jesus somewhere else, where would I go? The highest proportion of truth may be found in our movement. Again, that's not to say that there isn't truth elsewhere in other movements. Some of our Christian friends in out of the churches and other movements have a great deal of truth. I mean, I don't have much love for Jehovah's Witnesses, but Jehovah's Witnesses have a lot of truth. Some of the other movements that I can think of, can't think of the names offhand. But the highest proportion of truth, my opinion for me, is right here within the movement. By the way, when you look up the word Gilgal, you'll see it's associated with false worship entirely. So 1878, coming out of Gilgal, Elijah and Elisha into something new. Where do they go? They go to Bethel. Bethel means house of God. Bethel. House, Beth-el, God. This is a condition of a church during Brother Russell's ministry of a great deal of unity. Now, again, it's not to suggest that there weren't bumps in the road. You remember the great controversy in 1907 to 1909 over the New Covenant. So there were bumps in the road, but by and large, it was very united. There was a house of worship among the brethren that did very, very well. So this Bethel condition describes well the time during Brother Russell's ministry. And I believe not coincidentally, where Brother Russell had the home, the center was called Bethel. Coincidence? I don't think so. Lastly, we have Jericho. Jericho means place of fragrance. We detect a fragrance with our nose, not with our eyes. This suggests a condition where the consecrated are walking by faith, not by sight. And I think after Brother Russell's death, you had that very condition. Prior to that, you could see the Watchtower Bible and Tract Society. There was an organization. You could see it with your eyes. It was doing things, the photo drama, all this activity, all these blessings. But now the pastor died. Rutherford took over, started changing things, what would the brethren do? Imagine your feeling, let's say 1917, 1918, 1919, as you watch this. You know, I had the great privilege of knowing Brother Fry, Anton Fry, who was a member of the New York class, Brother Russell's class. He consecrated, by the way, in 1914. So he got at least a couple years with the pastor. And very shortly after that, they noticed the change. They were one of the ecclesias closest to the headquarters. They could see these things. They knew people that were there, working there. Those further out had no idea what was going on. And I think probably the very first class, I don't know this definitively, the very first ecclesia that parted from the Rutherford of the Society was the Jersey City class. Again, not surprisingly, that's about as close as you can get to the center. Brother Fry would tell us about this. So after the pastor's death, the brethren could no longer look to an organization. They began to walk by faith. And again, this has been the condition that we've been since then. All right, let's go a little bit further here. Elisha and Elijah come to the Jordan River. I got to stop here. That's current and future events. That's for the other brethren, so I'm not going to say too much about that. Brethren, what is the purpose of prophecy in God's plan? Think about it for a moment. If I said make a list, what good is prophecy to you and to me and to the church? Think about it just for a moment. Well, here's some suggestions. Of course, Jesus said, "Take ye heed, behold, I've told you these things beforehand." Remember, Jehovah said to Abraham, "Shall I not tell my friend Abraham what I'm going to do?" Prophecy accomplishes that. So here's a quick 3 items for your consideration. Number 1 is to show that Jehovah is still in command of history. What is happening in the earth today, what has happened in the eons in the past, what is happening in the future, is still controlled, every detail, by Jehovah God. He has not lost control. Things aren't going badly. Things are going precisely according to his plan. It's a praise to God. Number 2, to make us aware of the time we're living in. Remember, one of the things Jesus said, that the world would be a fall. They didn't know. Oh, let's get married. Let's eat. Let's drink. Everything's fine. Brethren, prophecy tells us the time that we're living in and allows us to make decisions, especially consecrated decisions, that are in harmony with what we know God is doing right now. And lastly, to strengthen our hope. Prophecy fulfilled allows us to look back and see, when God promises something, he's going to do it. Absolutely. So when we have promises that are fulfilled, our hope is strengthened so much. When we have promises that are not fulfilled, we say, I know God has already delivered. He's going to deliver on this too. Both on a historical, earthwide scale, and in my poor individual life, he's going to do what he wants. Brethren, these are just a few of the prophecies that are connected with Jesus' second presence. We had an hour and tried to work as many in as we can, some of the top ones, but there's much, much more as well. So what should our response be as we look at these fulfilled prophecies? Let's go back to the theme of our convention. But when these things begin to come to pass, look up and lift up your heads, because your redemption draweth nigh. Brethren, the redemption of the church collectively is getting closer and closer. Our individual redemption, finishing our consecrated life in faithful service to God, in obedience to his will, is something that's even closer. May we never lose track of this wonderful promise, because your redemption is closer every day. May the Lord add his blessing.